In this lesson, we're going to talk about the aggregation functions in Excel. Now, for starters, what is an aggregation? It's a fancy word that basically means doing something when you group a bunch of things together. So for example, if I was looking at a map of the United States and I wanted to know how many states there were, I'm aggregating the number of states, and that would be 50. So it's really just that simple. So now if you click on the aggregation tab, let's kind of look at what we're going to be doing in this lesson. Let me scroll up here a little bit. And we're going to build out this grid here so that we work with simple aggregations first. And that's where we're just going to get a count of a number of sales or get a sum or an average. Those are pretty simple because there's nothing else. We're just counting a bunch of things or summing up a column or taking an average. Then what we're going to do is come down here and we're going to add a criteria to it. So instead of just counting everything in a column, we're going to say, hey, only count the employees if the employee is this name. Okay, now another thing to notice here is I've built drop downs that have the names of all the employees in our little database. And so we'll use those to just see what the differences are if we just count by the number of employees, or we can sum the number of sales based on that employee, or take an average of the number of sales based on that employee. Now for this lesson, we're not going to go over how to build these drop downs. We are going to learn that in a later lesson. And that's the data validation lesson where we'll learn how to do drop downs. And then the last section we're going to do is where we have multiple criteria, like 2 or more. So here we want to count records based on a person's name and what company they sold for. And then we also want to do a sum of the sales based on the same criteria, the employee's name and the company they sold to. And same with average. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing I'm going to do that is I'm going to wipe out these formulas so we can build them all from scratch. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to create named ranges. So this is a big table of data and we want one of those named ranges for each column, but I'm going to show you another interesting way to do that. First thing I'm going to do though is delete the ones that are already there. So we'll go to Formulas and Name Manager, and now you see all the named ranges that are in here. Well, if you look here on the refers to, here's all the ones from the aggregation sheet, and there were some we had in the named ranges sheet too. I'm just going to select all the ones from the aggregation sheet. I'll hit Shift and click that. It'll select everything. And then I'm going to hit the delete to wipe out those named ranges. Are you sure? Yep. Now that may seem like we've got a lot of work ahead of us to create named ranges for every single column, but here's another shortcut to create named ranges. If you click on a cell in this table and do your Control A to select the entire table, now on that formula ribbon over in the define names, we can do create from selection. So based on our table, all those named ranges will be created for us. Click that. And now it's going to create names from values in the top row or the right column. We don't need any range names to go horizontally, so we're just going to do the top row. Click OK. And look at that in the Name Manager. Every column got a named range with its column header, and we're going to use those in our formula. Pretty slick. Okay, so let's go up here and let's get started. For the first one, for the first level of aggregations, we're just going to do simple ones. We just want to count the number of items in the sales column. So I'll go here and I will just type equals and I'll type in count and hit a parenthesis. And now it's just asking for a list of values. We could put in a cell range there, but since we have named ranges, let's just type in a named range. Sales. And now that's a count of the number of sales in our little table. Pretty simple. Now let's do the same for sum. Let's say equals sum. And we'll type in sales. And then average. Pretty simple. Now one of the things to note that I did mention before when we did named ranges, I wanted to put a little prefix of the worksheet name in front of the named range. Can't really do that when you do the define name ranges. Well, now let's go down to the second section here where we want to build the same aggregations, but we want it to be limited to only the employees that we select. So this is going to be your count if statement. That means I'm going to count this row if it meets a certain criteria. So let's just go ahead and hit equals and count if. And since it's just counting cells in a range, it's asking for the range to count. We're going to count employees. So that's the employee column. And hit comma. And then what's the criteria? Well, since we just have an employee, it's just going to be whatever's selected here. So we can hit that cell address and then just put our right parentheses on, hit enter. And now look what happens if we change that employee on the drop down. It changes based on what employee that we're selecting. So this is a pretty useful tool. I'll put it back to the first one. So now let's sum up all the sales of that employee. Okay, so we'll hit equals and we'll do our SUMIF. And now we want the range, the criteria, and the sum range. That's different. So here the first range is the one where we're going to limit what rows we're looking at. So that'll still be employee. And then the criteria is still going to be the employee name. But now we can't really sum up employee names. We need to sum a different column. Okay, so we're gonna choose sales to sum up the sales. And now when I hit enter, it's the sum of sales based on that employee. And if I click the drop down, you can see how that changes based on whatever employee is in there. So the last one is the average if. We're going to get the average sales for every employee. So we'll just do the same thing as sum. We'll do equals average if. And our range again is going to be employees because that's the range of what we're using for criteria and the employee name. And then what's the average range? That's also going to be sales. And hit enter. Pretty cool. Now it's time to really get a little bit more intricate here. Now we want to have more than one criteria to determine what we're going to aggregate together. So here we're going to use an employee name and the customer and the company of the customer that they sold to. Okay, so now we're, instead of just using count if function, we're going to use the if-s, or you can't say it ifs, the count ifs. So this is a little bit more involved. Let's go ahead and hit equals count ifs and hit the parenthesis. And now it says criteria range 1. Okay, so let's just start how we did the last one. Let's just type employee. And then what's the criteria for employee? Well, that's going to be whatever's in this cell. And now I hit comma and you see I get criteria range 2. These if-s functions will keep allowing you to put more and more criteria in. So it can be a really neat tool to build a little form for your data. So now our criteria range here is going to be the customer. And the value for the customer is going to be this cell. And now we'll hit parenthesis. So now we're looking at the number of sales from Ann, which we see below. It was 10 before, but now it's only 4 with company Z. So let's try another one. I can see down here she also sold to company BB. So let's try that. See how many were there. Company BB, 1. Now some of these will be 0 because she didn't have any sales to certain companies. But you see how we use multiple criteria to do our aggregation. Well, let's go ahead and do the SUMIFs and the AverageIfs the same way. So equals SUMIFs, and our sum range again is going to be sales. Criteria range 1 is employee. And the criteria is the employee's name. Then criteria range 2 is the customer. And criteria is the customer's name. Okay? And then we'll do average if equals average if. Average ifs, I mean. My average range is going to be sales. My first criteria range is going to be employee. and then it's going to be the employee. The second one's going to be customer, and the customer name, and hit enter. And now you can see how as I change different things, I'll keep and the same. If I change to a different company, all of the values change, and I get the sum and the average for that one sale. It's the same. Then I can try different cells to see what the sales were for this person. And so that's kind of a way to look at aggregation functions. You have a basic count, sum, and average that just do whatever's in that column. Then if you want to just go on one criteria, you can use the count if, the sum if, or the average if. And then if you want to limit by multiple, use the if-s functions. Those can carry you all the way through. There's a couple other aggregation functions that people use fairly often, and that's min and max. And min and max also have an if-s function associated with them. Works the same way though. You can just add in multiple criteria and it will give you the minimum or the maximum of values in that column. All right, so let's get ready for the next lesson.